Shepnaz Podcast begins now.
Welcome to the Shepnaz Podcast. I'm Joe and I'm your host today. As we enter the Lenten season, we're taking time to prepare our hearts by reflecting on the incredible sacrifice of Jesus. Today, we hear Pastor Rob when he gave us the series Cries from the Cross by looking at the first words Jesus spoke as he hung on the cross, "Father, forgive them." This message invites us to consider the depth of Christ's forgiveness and what it means for our daily lives. Let's lean in together as we hear part one of Pastor Rob's powerful teaching.
Martin Neimöller was a prominent, influential pastor, Lutheran pastor in Germany in the 1930s, about the time as Hitler was rising to power. Neimöller saw Hitler for who he was and what he was about, and he spent a great deal of time fervently speaking out against Hitler and the Nazis. He was eventually, because of him speaking out, arrested by the Nazis, and he was placed in a concentration camp, and he was termed as Hitler's special prisoner. He said that day after day he watched guards mistreat prisoners and pondered the words that Jesus spoke from the cross when he was hanging between two thieves, when Jesus said, "Father, forgive them, for they don't know what they're doing." From the window in his cell, he could see out the window, he could see the gallows that were just outside the wall of his cell. He said every day men were brought to the gallows and the noose was placed around their neck. He said, I could hear that some of the men prayed. I could hear the curses of other men. He said always in the back of his mind was the question, what will you do? What will you do, Neimöller, when the noose is placed around your neck? He said, will I cry out and curse those who are hanging me? Will I say things like, you criminals, you scum, there's a God in heaven and one day you're going to get yours? Or would I pray? And even would I pray for the man who's placing the noose around my neck? Those gallows, he said, became my most reliable teacher, for they revealed what was in the heart of men. While Jesus was hanging on the cross, he said 7 things. There were these 7 statements that Jesus made. These words that Jesus spoke from the cross while he was hanging on the cross were not just words that were mumbled in pain or under his breath or in stress. They were words that were intentionally chosen. They weren't reactions or they weren't responses to the things that were happening to him, and they weren't said in a vacuum. There was a setting, there was a context to everything Jesus said. To hear these words and miss the context of what Jesus had just gone through and what Jesus was going through and where he was going, it'd be to miss the meaning of those words. And so as we begin to jump into this series called Cries from the Cross, and we look at that first thing that Jesus said while he was hanging on the cross, I want to set the scene for you in the context of what was happening in Jesus' life. In your notes it says there was this great turbulence that preceded the cross. I mean, Jesus came as a baby. He lived his life as a human being, and he never sinned. He never had a wrong thought about someone, never said anything mean to anybody. He never did anything that the Father didn't want him to do. And at one point in his life, he called these 12 men around him, and he said, I'm going to invest my life in these men, and they're going to carry on this ministry that God has given to me. And Jesus poured his life into them. He taught them. He met their needs. He gave them purpose and significance and meaning. Jesus walked around and he healed people who were sick, and he raised people from the dead and brought them back to life. He cast demons out of people who were oppressed and in bondage by demonic spirits. Jesus performed miracles for the crowds and met their needs and fed them, and he performed miracles for individuals, and many things we'll probably never even know that weren't recorded that Jesus did. Just prior to Jesus' death, he was betrayed by a trusted friend. He was denied by his closest friend, and he was abandoned by most all of his other friends. Jesus was arrested illegally and charged with crimes that he did not commit. He endured 5 trials or interrogations that were a mockery and a sham of the justice system that existed that day. Jesus suffered personal insults. He was called all kinds of names. He was sentenced to the cruelest form of death that's still known to mankind. He was mocked. He was spit upon. His beard was pulled out. He was mistreated physically. He was mistreated emotionally. He was made fun of. He was the butt of many jokes and at the end of many pointing fingers. Jesus was beaten within an inch of his life. He was publicly humiliated. And before he was hung on the cross, he was exposed naked for the world to see. And that's all before the cross. Then there's this incredible treachery of the things that Jesus endured when he was on the cross. After being beaten and carrying the cross to the streets of Jerusalem to the place of crucifixion, Jesus was thrown to the ground where the soldiers placed that main crossbeam underneath his shoulders and arms. 2 soldiers held his body down and stretched his arms out parallel to the crossbeam, and they nailed Jesus' hands to the cross. Not through his hands, but through his wrists, because his hands wouldn't have been able to bear the weight of his body, and in the wrist there's more nerves, making it a more painful experience. Those 2 soldiers lifted Jesus by lifting each end of that crossbeam and placing it into a mortise on the upright beam that was already stuck in the ground. And then the soldiers bent Jesus' knees until his feet were flush to the cross, and they put a nail through both of his feet in the upright, nailing him to the cross. And there Jesus hung on the cross between 2 guilty criminals, and the world is watching. I want you to notice the difference between Jesus and the other people who have been crucified. Historians who have studied crucifixion say that when a person is being crucified, the response of the victim in that moment is to resist or to fight or to scream and to curse and spit on their executioners, whatever they can do to get away. But that was not the response that Jesus had that day as he was being crucified, according to the Gospels. All 4 of the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, record the events of the crucifixion, but only 3 of them, Matthew, John, and Luke, record these things that Jesus said while he was being crucified. According to these Gospels, there were 7 times that Jesus spoke, each sentence revealing his thoughts and his heart. Each phrase was full of meaning, one with instruction, one having encouragement, one with assurance, one with comfort. Each and every single phrase that Jesus said is a window into the heart and the soul of God the Father that we can see through his Son. Imagine what it would be like if you were dying. Imagine what it would be like if you knew that your last breath was just minutes away. The words that you would choose would be meaningful. You wouldn't carry on a hollow or trivial conversation. March Madness all of a sudden wouldn't matter. You wouldn't bring things up that didn't matter. You would get right to the heart of the conversation, and you would say to those present that you love and that you care about what really mattered in that moment. And that's exactly what Jesus did with these 7 cries from the cross. 7 phrases that he makes from the cross that are incredibly significant. And that's what we're going to talk about over these next few weeks. Before we talk about those first words that Jesus said, and the first words that Jesus said were, "Father, forgive them, for they don't know what they're doing." I want to make sure that we get the timing of all of that. I want to make sure that you understand when Jesus said that. In your notes, it says that Jesus' first words from the cross were offering forgiveness to his offenders while he was being crucified. These words from Jesus didn't come afterwards. They came while he was being crucified. Not after the pain had gone, but while his wounds still bled. While the offenses were occurring. Not after he had time to process all that. While the nails were being driven into his hands and his feet, he was asking the Father to forgive his offenders. When the pain was still at its greatest, when the cross was being dropped into the ground and causing great pain, while there was still hatred in the hearts of those who were executing him, while there was blood still dripping down the splintered beams of the cross, that's when Jesus offered this cry of forgiveness. And it's important, and we'll come back to that in just a few minutes. Many historians believe that this word, this phrase, this sentence that Jesus said from the cross wasn't uttered just one time. It's recorded one time, but many historians believe and theologians believe that every time someone did something to him, Jesus said, "Father, forgive them." When they nailed his right hand, he said, "Father, forgive them." When they nailed his left hand, they said, "Father, forgive them." When they nailed his feet, Jesus said, "Father, forgive them." When they jammed the crown of thorns down onto his head, he said, "Father, forgive them." When they jabbed the spear in his side, he said those words. Those words, as Luke records them in Luke 23, verse 34, were exactly this: Father, forgive them, for they don't know what they're doing. I want to look at three things before we wrap up our time this morning. The first thing is this, is that the words that Jesus spoke from the cross, that first phrase, was addressed to the Father. He was speaking directly to the Father. And let's talk about the Father for a second. Let's talk about this role that God had to play in this terrible thing that had happened that day. Can you imagine, as a father, watching your son experience what Jesus had just gone through? I mean, honestly, what father could watch the unjust suffering of his child and just let it happen and not retaliate? What father could stand idly by and allow the kind of treatment that Jesus was experiencing from evil, sinful men when he could clearly have stepped in and stopped the brutality and stopped the execution of his own son? I mean, make no mistake about it, God was there that day. He watched it happen. He listened to it happen. He was there listening to the son as the son spoke to him. What kind of father could do that? I'd say that the kind of father who was willing to endure even greater pain than his son to allow you and I the opportunity to experience forgiveness. When I was younger, I used to think, and I first heard that God loved me so much that he sent his son to die for me, I was a little bit confused. I would think, man, if God loved me so much, why would God send his son to die for me? If God loved me so much, why wouldn't he die for me? I mean, it seemed like a cheap cop-out, right? I love you so much, I'm sending someone else to die for you. And then I got married, had my own kids, and all of a sudden it made sense. It would have been way easier for God to step in and say, let my son go, crucify me. I mean, that's what any parent would do, right? You see your children suffering and you want to step in, you want to stop it, you want to keep it from happening, and that's what you would do. But God didn't do that. He was there, he was watching, he was listening, and he paid a much higher price to watch it happen and to see it happen than to step in and to allow his son to be free from all of that. And I want to be sure as we move on from this, to be sure to not minimize the Father's role on that terrible day, because he paid a great price that day as well. Those words that Jesus spoke to the Father were life-changing words. He says, Father, forgive them. Jesus asked for forgiveness for his offenders. If you've ever been wronged, you know you don't forgive nice people. You don't forgive people who've never done anything wrong to you. Forgiveness is always aimed at those who have offended you or wronged you or caused some kind of hurt in some way. But the natural response is not to forgive someone who hurts us. The natural response is to seek revenge and retaliation and make sure that they get what's coming due to them, right? But that's not what Jesus did. Jesus did not ask for retaliation. He did not ask for justice. He did not ask for vengeance. He did not ask for punishment. Jesus offered mercy for his offenders. His prayer was for Judas, who knew what he was doing when he betrayed Jesus with 30 pieces of silver. It was for Pilate, who knew he was condemning an innocent man. It was for the Sanhedrin, who had bribed people to make false accusations because they knew that the charges against Jesus wouldn't stick. It was for the soldiers who beat him and whipped him when he was tied to that stump that day. It was for the people who shouted insults and spit on him as he carried the cross through the city streets. It was for the man who jammed the crown of thorns down on Jesus' head. It was for the soldiers who ultimately put the nails in Jesus' hands and his feet. It was for the men that gambled for his clothes and for the man who stabbed him in the side to make sure that he was dead. And when Jesus says, Father, forgive them, he was also thinking about you and he was thinking about me. I know you weren't born and I wasn't born and we weren't there that day, but our sins were there. The things that we were going to do, the things that we're going to do, were all there that day. The sins of the entire world were there that day. And while we may not have been physically present, we were present because it was ultimately our sin. Everything you have done, everything that I have done that was wrong, that was an offense to the holiness of God, that contributed to the crucifixion that day. And when Jesus said, Father, forgive them, he was including you in his prayer to the Father. And I think about that phrase, Father, forgive them. What was Jesus really asking? I mean, what was Jesus asking the Father really to do? And I think about this. I think about this definition of forgiveness. And here's what I know Jesus was doing. He was asking the Father to release his offenders from the guilt of the things that they had done wrong and from the punishment that they deserved. I mean, all through the Old Testament, starting in Genesis, we can find that our sin has consequences, and our sin has these things, this things that we have to pay, and you and I can't pay that. And what Jesus was saying was, God, forgive them for the guilt, for the things that they've done, and for the punishment that's due their wrong actions. And it was perfectly right for Jesus to do that, because in Isaiah chapter 53, verse 5, the prophet prophesied, he said, but Jesus would be pierced for our transgressions. He would be crushed for our iniquities. The punishment that brought us peace would be upon him, and by his wounds we would be healed. I mean, it was perfectly right for Jesus to do what he was doing. And so literally Jesus was saying, I want to release those people from the debt that they owe me because of the wrong that's done. And in your notes, if you look, there's a definition of forgiveness. To forgive someone is to consciously and willingly and intentionally choose to release them from the debt that they owe you because of the wrong that is done to you. And here's what I found all in my life and all through history as I study the Bible and everything, that forgiveness always costs somebody something. Forgiveness never comes free. Forgiveness is almost always accompanied by hurt that you have in your life because of that, and it always costs somebody something. Then I was thinking about these words. Jesus spoke, Father, forgive them, release them from the debt that they owe and the guilt of their sin. And then Jesus goes on and he tells us why he asked for forgiveness. He says, Jesus said, Father, forgive them, for they don't know what they're doing. I mean, these words that Jesus spoke were literally for your benefit and for my benefit. They were for the benefit of the guilty. Jesus could have prayed this prayer in his mind, in his head, and he could have said, forgive them, and no one ever knew what he was saying. But he said it out loud because he wanted us to hear it, because he wanted those who were guilty that day to hear him offer them forgiveness.
Thank you for joining us today for this episode of the Shepnaz Podcast. Pastor Rob reminded us how Jesus' first words from the cross reveal a forgiveness far deeper than we can often imagine. We hope this message encouraged you as you continue your Lenten journey. Be sure to join us tomorrow for the conclusion of this opening message in the Cries from the Cross series. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And if you have any questions or want to comment, email us anytime at podcast@shepnaz.org. For Pastor Rob, I'm Joe. Have a great day. This podcast is a production of the Shepherd Church of the Nazarene, Gahanna, Ohio. Email to podcast@shepnaz.org and let us know what you think.